Hi guys, I'm gonna just do a short lecture video on the autonomic and somatic motor nervous systems because we need to really get going on cardiovascular. We've got 2 cardiovascular lectures next week. So if I do this short one, it'll be a lot quicker to go through the difficult portions of the autonomic and somatic motor nervous systems together. So I got started on this in the 8:30 class, but not in the 11 a.m. class. So just starting with Roman numeral 2, you guys, of course, know that the nervous system's got 3 primary functions. It does sensation, which is information in. It does integration, which is within the central nervous system, sort of the conscious and subconscious decision-making part. And then it does information out, which is the response part. This set of notes, autonomic and somatic motor nervous systems, is all about really the information out. So neurons, we've been talking about them quite a bit, but neurons have 2 special characteristics. They can receive any kind of stimulus, light, temperature, pressure, whatever, and convert it into an action potential because their cell membranes have voltage-gated channels on them, and only electrical systems, muscle and nervous tissue, does. And then neurons are also special because they can start an action potential on another cell because they actually release neurotransmitters. Okay, so where I want to make sure that you guys are prepared is with the vocabulary of the functional organization of the nervous system. So I've made a quiz for you, which I will upload right after I upload this video. It's a take-home quiz. It's collaborative. I want you to do as much of it as you can before I see you on Tuesday. And then I'll leave it open so that you can correct it or whatever after lecture on Tuesday too. But I'd really like for you to try to get down the terminology that I'm talking about before you come to class. Otherwise, it will be unnecessarily difficult for you. Okay, so when you look at the functional organization of the peripheral nervous system, it goes back to this figure right here. I don't cover the enteric nervous system, so we're just going to pretend this little part isn't here. So basically, we have this 2-way communication between the peripheral nervous system, which is in the lighter color over here, and the central nervous system. Central nervous system functionality is really complex. We talked about it quite a bit when we looked at synapses. But what we are really going to focus in here on is this portion, that portion of the nervous system. But just to sort of make sure that we've got the organization down, the 2 branches of the nervous system are quite often called sensory and motor. Sensory carries information toward the central nervous system, and motor carries information away from the central nervous system. But the terms that are more frequently used than sensory and motor in physiology, for whatever reason, I don't actually know, is afferent, which is actually pronounced afferent, and efferent, which is actually pronounced efferent, but I'm going to mispronounce them so you can hear the difference. And so let's just talk briefly about this one because we're going to be here for the rest of the time. The afferent division of the nervous system carries information in the form of action potentials from sensory receptors. And the sensory receptors can be multiple places. So these would be the sensory receptors out here. From the sensory receptors to the central nervous system. Now, the only sensations that you're ever aware of are those that actually make it all the way to the cerebral cortex, which is not very many of them. So for instance, you are consciously aware of, for instance, something touching the skin of your left hand. Because there is a portion of the cerebral cortex, it's actually the postcentral gyrus in the right side, that is mapped to the skin in your left hand. But you are also, for instance, monitoring the pH of your blood, and you're never made aware of that because it doesn't go to your cerebral cortex. So FYI, you are not consciously aware of most of your senses, only the ones that go to the cerebral cortex. Okay. So the efferent division of the nervous system is what this set of notes is all about. The efferent division is this output division in which the brain and the spinal cord send action potentials to stimulate skeletal muscle or activate or deactivate cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and glands. So the muscular system notes that we did for the last test were really all about the somatic division of the efferent nervous system, stimulating the skeletal muscle. Sorry, I keep doing that. The skeletal muscle effector. So here's a word that you need to know. The thing that skeletal muscle actually is responsible for is stimulating is called the effector. So receptors send information through the afferent nervous system, and the efferent nervous system sends information to effectors. So get used to that term because it really doesn't go away. So the somatic motor neurons control skeletal muscle. So the other way of saying that is that skeletal muscle is the effector for the somatic motor division of the peripheral nervous system. Now, as far as the somatic division goes, this is all stuff that you know. So let's just go ahead and get it out of the way so we can use it for comparison contrast. So with skeletal muscle stimulation, so here's skeletal muscle right here. Skeletal muscle stimulation is often voluntary simply because, again, the cerebral cortex maps to control for most of your skeletal muscles. So, for instance, I can voluntarily use the muscles associated with speech right now because they're mapped to the cerebral cortex. But the skeletal muscle isn't always voluntary because you also have the ability for instance, the pons, the medulla oblongata, to control respiration in your diaphragm. So it's not as if the cerebral cortex is the only thing that can control skeletal muscle. So I don't usually call it the voluntary division. I call it the somatic motor division, and I say it is usually voluntary. But hiccups aren't voluntary, and shivering isn't voluntary. So skeletal muscle doesn't always behave voluntarily. Okay, as far as the anatomical route, you already know this. You may just not have thought of it specifically before. But the anatomical route from the central nervous system to a skeletal muscle fiber is really simple because there's only one motor neuron. So the motor neuron cell body for skeletal muscle contraction is in the gray matter of somewhere in the central nervous system. Could be the brain, could be the spinal cord. But this one is like maybe showing you something from the cervical region of the spinal cord, maybe controlling the skeletal muscle. Let's say this is one of the heads of the biceps brachia. I don't know. I can't tell from the picture, but let's just say it is. And this would be in the cervical region of the spinal cord. Okay, so what we are saying is that the anatomical route from the central nervous system to skeletal muscle is very simple, and we're going to use it for comparison contrast next time. So the somatic motor neuron is, the cell body is in the CNS, brain or spinal cord. The axon goes through, for those of you who remember, this is the ventral or anterior route, and it goes straight through a nerve all the way to the skeletal muscle fiber and forms a neuromuscular junction. So important thing for you to note is that there are, dang it, Melanie, there are no ganglia on the way, right? This ganglion is not part of the motor conversation. That's sensory. So there are no ganglia on the way. So, and you already know these parts too. There's only ever one synapse. It always releases the same neurotransmitter, which is, pause, the neurotransmitter for skeletal muscle contraction is what? It is acetylcholine. Yes, you knew that. The effect is always excitatory. I'm not saying you always get an action potential and always get contraction, but you always get depolarization. Yes? Because the reason that you always get depolarization with acetylcholine on skeletal muscle neuromuscular junctions is because the mechanism of excitation is to open sodium channels and cause depolarization. So now, putting this back together with our last set of notes, this synapse would be called something ergic. Do you guys know what ergic it is? Pause. It is cholinergic. Hopefully you got it. Okay, so where we are going to get into new material next time, and we'll do it relatively quickly because it's not that bad, is we are going to use what we know about the somatic nervous system and compare it to the autonomic nervous system. So let me just give you the easy parts now, and then we'll do the hard parts together in class. So the autonomic nervous system is going to go to different effectors, and the effectors for the autonomic nervous system are cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and glands. And all of these organs that you see have one or more of those three tissues in them. So cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and glands are the effectors for the autonomic nervous system. It's also sometimes called the visceral motor division. And the reason it's worth talking about is because if you control cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and glands, you end up controlling a lot of your vital physiological processes. A lot of the processes that go wrong are supposed to be controlled by the autonomic nervous system. Now, I'm not saying it's necessarily nervous system that they go wrong, but since you guys are wanting to go into something related to human health, you probably ought to know how, for instance, the respiratory system and the digestive system and the urinary system and the reproductive system are wired up to the nervous system. So the cardiovascular system is controlled by the autonomic nervous system because, of course, the heart is cardiac muscle. But also vessels, guys. Vessels have smooth muscle in the wall, and by controlling the diameter of vessels, you control blood flow to regional areas. The respiratory system, now the diaphragm is skeletal muscle, so that's not controlled by the autonomic nervous system. But the bronchioles and the diameter of the bronchioles, that's controlled by the autonomic nervous system. Digestive system is mostly smooth muscle and glandular function. Urinary system, blood flow to and from the kidney is controlled by primarily smooth muscle dilation and constriction, and then the urinary system has a decent amount of smooth muscle within the whole urinary system and glandular function. And then the reproductive function, it's almost all glands and smooth muscle. So we want to take a minute at least to talk about autonomic nervous system, because these are the body systems that usually end up with you seeking medical help to take care of them. So last tidbit that I'm going to do right now is just to show you sort of an overview of what we're going to do next time. So unlike skeletal muscle has basically one connection. In either with skeletal muscle, you either stimulate it and it depolarizes and maybe contracts, or you just don't stimulate it. Autonomic nervous system is different because autonomic nervous system effectors have what we call dual innervation. Okay, so I'm going to introduce you just to the concept of dual innervation, and then show you what the rest of the notes looks like, and then we'll do the rest of them when we are in class. Dual innervation means, let's look at the heart because everybody can recognize the heart. So please note that the sympathetic nervous system, which is fight or flight, has innervation to the heart. Yes? If you stimulated that, it would increase the heart rate. But notice that the heart also has innervation that's both a different anatomical and physiological sort of root and functionality. The parasympathetic nervous system also has innervation to the heart. And so for the heart, not for all organs, this would be like putting the gas on and increasing the heart rate, but you also have brakes. This is actively inhibiting what happens in the heart, so that would actually be actively decreasing. So dual innervation instead of single innervation. So you can't turn skeletal muscle up and down with the nervous system. You can turn it up or you can leave it alone. But with the nervous system, almost all your autonomic effector organs have what we call dual innervation. So hopefully that makes sense. So what we will do on Tuesday is we will look at the neurotransmitters that are released from both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system, and the anatomical and physiological route that you would take to get to them. What you will see is, well, this one is relatively simple. A single neuron goes to the effector and you only release neurotransmitters once. These are more complicated. You have two different neurons in a chain that go to the effector organ. So we're going to have a ganglion in the middle. We're going to have one neuron that starts in the CNS, releases neurotransmitters at its friend neuron in a ganglion, and the second neuron is going to go to the effector. So what we will have to do, and I encourage you to try to read through your notes and prepare for it, because then it'll be really easy in class. We have to figure out what neurotransmitter is released here and what effect does it have on this neuron. What neurotransmitter is released here and what effect does it have on the effector organs. Okay, And we will do that, and we'll fill in all of these. It doesn't even take that long. It's not particularly hard. And I really loved this figure. It's from some other textbook. I don't know which one. And you could probably do it before you got to class. It's not actually in the quiz, but the comparison of the somatic and autonomic nervous systems. So all of these blanks that you see right here are blanks that you could fill in. So here's the blank nervous system that goes to skeletal muscle, the neurotransmitter that at the effector, you would fill that in, fill in all the missing blanks. Here is the blank nervous system that includes the parasympathetic and the blank. And then you may not know this yet. You could either look it up in your notes or you could wait for me to talk about it on Tuesday. A neurotransmitter is released here. And then there's another neurotransmitter released at the effector. Okay. And this one, the parasympathetic, releases a neurotransmitter at the effector. And then this tells you both the effector organs and then the effect. And then the last thing we do is just sort of a little tour of sympathetic effects on a little subset of organs, just to sort of make you get the story down, and then parasympathetic effects on the subset of organs. So I'm hoping that this won't take more than, 20, 25 minutes in class, and then we would start cardiovascular system on Tuesday. So I'm going to record this and put it up on YouTube for you guys. And then I will put a take-home quiz. It's only 8 questions that asks you questions mostly about what I just talked about, but also some I haven't covered yet. And you can go ahead and give those a shot because I'll leave it open until Tuesday evening so that you can correct anything that you got wrong. Okay, have a good weekend, guys.